anyone else joining at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and get started because we've got a pretty tight, packed, fun agenda today. So we don't want to take up too much time with all this other stuff. So again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the first of 2 webinars for Tribal Brownfield Grant Overview for EPA Region 5. Webinar series. I am Jennifer Clancy. I'm the co-director for the Tribal Technical Assistance to Brownfields program, or Tribal Tab. And I am joined by our friends from EPA Region 5, Jackie Crano and Yesenia Chavez, as well as part of our Region 5 KSU Tab team, Beth Grigsby and Roxanne Anderson, and my Tribal Tab co-director, Oral Salters. And we are all thrilled to have you joining us today. And like I mentioned, we've got a really exciting afternoon and lineup ahead for you. So next slide, please, Dana. I do have a few just real quick little housekeeping things before we really get going into everything. If you have technical difficulties with your connection at any point throughout this webinar, please call the number that's there on the screen, 785-200-7005, or email chsr@ksu.edu, and someone should be able to assist you if possible, to resolve whatever those technical issues are. We are recording this webinar today, and the recording along with the presentation slides will be available on the KSU Tab website where you registered for this event within the next few days. Dana has been sharing that link in the chat box, and we will continue to pop it in there periodically throughout the webinar today, so you have that resource to get back to. Next slide, please, Dana. Okay, and a few just real quick reminders just to ensure that everybody here has a really pleasant experience today. All participants should be muted, but please just double check and make sure that your microphone is muted throughout the webinar today. If you are using your phone for audio, please make sure that your computer audio is muted in addition to your phone audio. And so this will just reduce the chance of static and feedback that, may get picked up and that we may all hear. Also, please make sure that your video remains off during the presentation unless you're a presenter. And to make sure that we're able to verify your attendance, please change your participant name to match the name that you use for registration. And you can do this by clicking on the participants icon in the Zoom toolbar. And when the list of participants comes up, just locate yourself, click on the More button and select Rename. And at that point, a new box will appear asking you to enter your new screen name. And we really would like this to be as interactive as possible, given, that we're asking you to stay muted and keep your camera off and all of that. So because of that, to keep this in the spirit of, being interactive, we do really encourage you all to ask questions throughout the event today. During the actual webinar, you can put your questions in the chat box, which is located also in the Zoom toolbar. We will open it up at the end for actual, kind of discussion if there is any. You will have the opportunity again throughout to ask questions in chat. We'll pause periodically to address any questions that come in, and then we will open it up for discussion when we're all wrapped up here. So with that, next slide, Dana, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jackie and Yesenia to really get us going in all this great information today.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction. So as Jennifer mentioned, today's webinar will be the Tribal Brownfields Grant Overview for EPA Region 5. I'm joined with my colleague, Yesenia Chavez, who is also a Brownfields Project Manager here in Region 5. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn off my camera because I got a message that said low bandwidth, so just to preserve that. Today's agenda includes purpose that I'll go over in the next slide, grant competition overview for EPA Brownfields grants, leveraging funding with competitive grants. We'll have a great panel discussion, closing and evaluations, as well as questions. Next slide, please. The purpose of this webinar is to Region 5 tribes with an overview of the grant competition and types of grants that are available, provide information on resources to utilize when applying and the anticipated timeline of the competition, and also provide an opportunity to learn how tribes are utilizing the competitive funding to leverage work they are already conducting. Next slide, please. Some of the grant types that we will go over today include assessment, assessment coalition, community-wide assessment grants for states and tribes, also known as CWAG Street, multi-purpose, and cleanup grants. Two grants that we will not go over today are the Brownfields Job Training Grants and the Revolving Loan Fund. For the Brownfields Job Training Grants, we will have that session during the Tribal Brownfields Workshop in Minnesota, so stay tuned for that. Next slide, please. So for the FY25 potential Brownfields grant offerings, you can see in this chart here the offerings that they have for this year. As you can see, multi-purpose is not included in this year's competition, so please keep that in mind. We are still going to discuss multi-purpose as it's more for an informational, but just so that you know, these are the ones that are available for this upcoming fall. So as you can see, starting off with the assessment grants, there's a tier for new and existing grantees. There's a maximum project period for those assessment grants of 4 years and a maximum amount per grant, which is $500,000. Estimated number of awards is shown there as well, and it also provides the type of funding, whether that's regular appropriated funds or the bipartisan infrastructure law funds. Moving on to assessment coalitions, those are also for 4 years. The maximum amount per grant is $1.5 million. And moving on to the assessments for states and tribes. This one's for up to 5 years with a maximum amount of $2 million. Moving on to cleanup, there are 3 different tiers for that one. All of the cleanups should be for 4 years, starting off with $500,000, moving up to $2 million, and then moving up to $4 million. So that's a brief overview, and as you can see, the total, this is a large amount of money going to these different types of grants. And again, these amounts are subject to change, so similar for estimated number of awards, depending on whatever applications we receive, these can change. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it over to Yesenia Chavez, who will go over the assessment grants.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, so as Jackie mentioned, the assessment grants are definitely depends on if you're a new or existing grantee, but generally grant funds can be used for a variety of activities for assessment grants, including compiling a list of brownfield sites and creating an inventory, identifying past uses for these sites and their characterization, determining any existing contamination, and also having a scope and plan process for site assessment, cleanup, and reuse. And finally, informing and engaging stakeholders and having community involvement within the grant. Specifically, community-wide assessment grants are appropriate for communities that are beginning to address their brownfield challenges, as well as for communities that have ongoing efforts to bring sites into productive reuse. As Jackie mentioned, the funding for community-wide assessment grants is up to $500,000, and the project period is up to 4 years. Next slide. Assessment grants are meant for conducting brownfields planning and developing site reuse plans, which means taking into account local community priorities, market conditions, infrastructure availability, environmental contamination, public health issues, and local ordinances that all shape brownfield site reuse opportunities. For assessment grants, participant support costs are allowable. This includes stipends that can be used for attendees to be at community meetings, for them to travel to community meetings, or to provide childcare expenses that encourage attendance at community meetings for people that wouldn't normally be able to attend. Community liaison participant support costs are also available. You're able to use a portion of the grant for eligible participant support costs associated with 1 community liaison per target area who is not an employee of the grant recipient. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it back over to Jackie to go over the CWAG street.
Thank you, Yesenia. So as mentioned earlier in the presentation, the community-wide assessment grants for states and tribes, also known as CWAG street. One thing to note for this is the eligible entities. So this includes states, tribes, intertribal consortia, and eligible Native corporations in Alaska. So the eligible entities for this does decrease, but there's probably a higher probability to be able to receive one of these types of grants. As mentioned before as well, you may request funding up to $2 million to address sites contaminated by hazardous substances and/or petroleum. And the project period, again, is up to 5 years. And one thing to note, if applying for this grant, you may not apply for a community-wide assessment grant, assessment coalition, or a multi-purpose grant. And as I mentioned before, this is based off the previous request for applications, guidance documents, so some of these items may change. Next slide, please. And just to kind of give an overview of some of the requirements for this type of grant, the applicants must propose at least 3 target areas and at least 5 priority sites, including 1 priority site in each target area. It's required to assess a minimum of 10 sites throughout the jurisdiction or geographic boundaries, and all sites selected during the period of performance must be located in an underserved community. And applications that do not include at least 1 community group or liaison will be reviewed less favorably. Again, this is from the previous RFA, so some of these things might change. So we'll definitely share a link where that RFA will be posted in the coming weeks. Next slide, please. And now passing it back to Yesenia to go over the Assessment Coalition grants.
Thank you. So to note, Assessment Coalition grants are a partnership between non-lead members and lead members. The non-lead members do not have the capacity to apply for and manage their own EPA cooperative agreement and otherwise would not have access to Brownfield's grant resources. So applicants are encouraged to include eligible community-based nonprofit organizations as non-lead coalition members to help promote strong local engagement. For these coalition grants, you must identify a target area for each member in the coalition, and the target areas may not overlap. Recipients must assess a minimum of 2 sites in each member's geographic boundary throughout the project period. And the funding for Assessment Coalition grants is up to $1.5 million, with the project period up to 4 years. Next slide. Coalitions are designed for 1 lead eligible entity to partner with other eligible entities. The lead member must be a state, county government, Indian tribe, or a group of general purpose units of local government established under a governmental authority. For non-lead members, there must be at least 2, but no more than 4 eligible entities, which cannot be the state. Entities that have an open Brownfields MARC grant and those that were awarded a MARC grant that closed in 2016 or later are not eligible to be a non-lead member. Members from the coalition may not be an agency or instrumentality of themselves. Next slide, please. For multi-purpose grants, it's appropriate for communities that have identified through community engagement efforts a discrete area, such as a neighborhood, a number of neighboring towns, a district, a corridor, a shared planning area, or a census tract that has 1 or more brownfield sites. Communities are able to use funds to carry out a range of eligible assessment and cleanup activities, including planning and additional community engagement activities using multi-purpose grants. The funding for multi-purpose grants is up to $1 million and the project period is up to 5 years. Next slide, please. Multi-purpose grants have an increased emphasis on completing actions within the target area, so applicants should have a capacity to conduct a range of eligible activities, including developing inventories of brownfield sites, conducting community involvement activities and environmental site assessments, developing cleanup plans and reuse plans, carrying out the cleanup activities on brownfield sites owned by the applicant, and developing an overall plan for revitalization. The minimum requirements are likely to be the same as in the past for multipurpose grants, which includes at least one phase 2 assessment, one cleanup, which can be a site that previously received a cleanup grant, and one redevelopment plan if one does not exist already. Next slide. For cleanup grants, these generally provide funding for a recipient to carry out cleanup activities at brownfield sites owned by the applicant. Funds may be used to address sites contaminated by petroleum and/or hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants, including hazardous substances commingled with petroleum. For cleanup grants, an applicant may request funding to address either a single brownfield site or multiple brownfield sites within the same application. And for funding, an applicant may request up to $500,000 or $2 million or up to $5 million. And the project period stays the same of up to 4 years for any of those funding amounts. Next slide. Cleanup grants are consistent with the direction on cost sharing in the bipartisan infrastructure law, so a cost share is not required, but the eligible entity must own the sites at the time of application, and the sites must be fully assessed, which generally includes completing an all-appropriate inquiry. And something to note is that sites that previously received cleanup grants are not eligible. Next slide. For an overview of the application requirements, generally the first 3 pages are the narrative information sheet, which do not include a summary or overview of your narrative/project. It's more information that is necessary to identify. And then after those first 3 or 4 pages, the narrative begins. And that section is where all of the information, your summary and overview, and all of the specifics on the project are included. For the different types of grant applications, you'll note that the page length is going to be different, but plenty of information can be found online. And feel free to refer to the application submission checklist and the guidelines. There are also several recordings available online at the MARC grant application resources that cover the specifics on each of the sections and what needs to be included in the narrative. Next slide. Again, a lot of resources can be found online on our MARC grant application resources, open solicitations, and applicants interested in applying for more than one grant type can review the FY24 eligibility chart for multiple applications to help determine which other grants are available to you. If you currently have an EPA Brownfields grant, you can review the FY24 eligibility chart for existing grant recipients to determine which other grants are available to you. And also can always reach out to the Brownfields team. Next slide. Turn it back over to Jackie.
Thank you, Yesenia. So now to go over the anticipated FY25 competition timeline. Again, these dates are subject to change, but this is a general overview of that timeline. So typically in the fall, the grant guidelines are posted. Following that, in the winter, grant applications are submitted and reviewed. In the spring, the grant recipient selections are announced. And in the summer, work plans are submitted and the grants are typically awarded before that project period starts. I did add a link in the chat to that webpage that Yesenia referred to. It has information on the MARC applications, and you'll find there the same chart that we showed earlier, as well as a location for open solicitations for when that RFA request for applications comes out. Next slide, please. So now to go over leveraging funding with competitive grants. So competitive funding can complement 128A funding. It fills gaps in for the funding that might be needed, allows for additional funding to conduct site-specific work such as site assessments, cleanup plans, redevelopment plans, as well as cleanups. So we know typically for 128A, it's a lot of building capacity, again, focusing on those 4 elements, whether that's inventory, oversight, cleanup standards, or public outreach. So this competitive grant funding will allow for more site-specific work if funding is something that does not allow for these site-specific activities to occur. Next slide, please. And just to kind of give an overview of the types of activities conducted with CWAG Street, which is a community-wide assessment grants for states and tribes, and some of the activities some entities are working on are program management, but majority of funding is towards site assessments. They also conduct outreach, cleanup planning, reuse planning, and inventory and prioritization. And to keep in mind, really focus on what their needs are. For example, one entity is focusing on dry cleaners, creating an inventory of abandoned dry cleaners, assessing those sites to kind of move those along. Another entity is really focusing on the outreach. So we're creating an outreach team with this funding to be able to assess sites in areas that haven't been assessed before. And again, doing that community engagement portion. So just to kind of keep those things in mind. Next slide, please. Brownfields funding considerations. So when applying or looking into these types of grants, kind of thinking ahead of the number of brownfield sites. So depending on the number of sites, it will help identify the type of grant to apply for. If there are numerous sites that you want to assess, maybe the CWAG Street grant is the way to go. What are the proposed projects? Is it an assessment or cleanup? I know for this upcoming competition, the multi-purpose grant is not available, but maybe considering that for the future if you want to assess and clean up a site all in one cooperative agreement. Capacity to manage grants. There's a lot of work going on, and we know it's a challenge sometimes, so maybe getting one of these grants will help with hiring contractors to conduct assessment or cleanup work, and providing oversight to those activities as well. And lastly, the timeline. So we know sometimes there's emergency events that occur that need immediate remediation. So thinking of that, maybe a competitive grant isn't helpful. But again, if there's numerous sites that haven't been addressed due to lack of funding, this might be something to look into. Next slide, please. And I will pass it on to our moderator, Jennifer Clancy, for the panel.
Okay, thank you, Jackie and Yesenia. That was really great. I haven't seen any questions come in the chat box, but I thought I would just pause for a moment in case people were frantically typing their questions into the chat box about the grants. And if there are questions and you can't type that fast, it's cool. Go ahead and type them in there, and we'll still make sure that they get addressed at some point while we're here today. So now we're going to hear from 2 tribal communities that have very successfully written and received competitive EPA Brownfields grants. And so they're going to share some of their experiences related to this competitive process and how things really evolved and played out for their communities. So Jason White and Jen Satchel, if you are willing to turn on your camera and be spotlighted, so it's not just me that's showing up here on the screen, I would appreciate that. And so let's just get started by, I would ask that each of you, in whichever order, I don't really care who goes first, each one of you introduce yourself, share, what your role is within your community, and then whatever else you would like to share about yourself and your community, and then what type of grant that you received, just to kind of set the stage for the rest of the discussion that we're going to have here.
Sure. I'll let Jennifer go first, and I'll jump in right behind her and let Jennifer.
All right. Thanks, Jason. I'm Jen Satchel. I am an environmental coordinator with Bay Mills Indian Community, and we're located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right on the shores of Lake Superior. It's a beautiful place to be from. And we have received 2 cleanup grants over the past 2 years to address 2 sites.
afternoon, OCO. I'm Jason White with Cherokee Nation's Environmental Programs. I'm an environmental director, and I work primarily with our Brownfields and Superfund grants. And we also have a Brownfields 128A grant, and we have a BIGL grant as well for Brownfields. But one of the grants that we want to share with everyone is that Cherokee Nation applied for one of the community-wide grants. So we're really excited about getting it. Look forward to talking with you guys and sharing more information.
And Jason, that specifically was the CWAG Street, correct? The community-wide assessment specifically for states and tribes.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so again, in whichever order, whoever jump in, I'm fine. How did you get started in this process, and why did you decide to pursue Brownfield's competitive funding? Was this based on a larger project need or because of a number of smaller projects? And then how did you fit this into your existing environmental program? I just threw a lot there out at you, so I can any part of that at any time.
I guess I'll go first. So just like Jason, we also had a 128A annual appropriation funding, and we also have the BIL funding. We got into the Brownfields program a little differently than a lot of tribes. We have had our annual appropriation since 2019, and we started right off with a cleanup, using that annual appropriation to do a spill that occurred on the reservation at a building that we call the Silver Dome. So I'm going to throw out a lot of kind of like a timeline here. Since then, we've been working to build up our Brownfields program and with that annual appropriation, and assessing and addressing all the properties that we can. And then in 2021, the tribe acquired a new property that's called Chippewa Landing, and that had environmental liabilities associated with it when we purchased it. So in 2022, we applied for cleanup funding for that property, and we weren't successful with that application. We participated in the debriefing that's offered by EPA when an application isn't awarded, and that was really helpful. I definitely recommend doing that if you're not funded. So we applied again in 2023, we were awarded, and now we're in the cleanup process for that property. And then back to the Silver Dome, which got us into the Brownfields program in the first place. We found some additional issues on that property. We were just sort of slowly chugging away at that using our annual appropriation. But we found additional unexpected contamination there. So knowing that that property was going to take a lot more effort and funding to address, we applied for another cleanup grant, and we were awarded that funding this past spring.
And I'm excited to present what doing because we're able to, we actually had a community grant way back in the past. Would love to get another one, and look forward to hearing what other tribes are doing and seeing as well. For Cherokee Nation, our Brownfields grant focused primarily with our tribe, our Cherokee Nation reservation, as well as assisting other tribes within the ITEC consortia. But within our reservation, we had a lot of communities reaching out to the tribe, wanting to get information more on redevelopment. So for us, the community-wide assessment grant was kind of more like, how can Cherokee Nation assist the communities? How can they assist these cities that have these potential sites, but don't really know where to go, what to do, and how to get these sites assessed? So ours was based on the need. So we kind of were actually looking into this grant. We kind of see what some of the other tribes were doing as our state partners, and talked to EPA. And we thought this would be a good fit for us. At first, we were very intimidated by this grant because it's very huge. And so it was our first time writing for it. And we reached out to some communities, instantly got like 5 communities right off the bat. And we know that eventually this is a 5-year grant that will expand out to additional communities within Cherokee Nation. And we want to be able to help address some of their redevelopment needs, assessment needs, as well as also help with some of the planning needs. Now, we found out that several of these communities have what we call community type-based issues. For example, whether it be food sustainability issues or environmental justice issues or climate change, because one of our projects has a flooding issue. So each of these communities had different needs. So it was interesting to reach out to these communities and see what they have in mind. So we're excited about the grant. We haven't actually started yet, but we took a chance on the grant and we were very surprised to get it. So.
That's wonderful. It's really exciting to hear what both of you are doing with and for your communities with these opportunities, and cannot wait to continue to hear all the progress that you make. So we talk about this a lot in the Brownfields world, that you really kind of can't do Brownfields redevelopment in a bubble, in isolation, right? So kind of thinking about that, what other departments or organizations did you coordinate with, or did you coordinate with other departments and organizations as part of preparing for this grant and receiving and administering the grant?
I'll go first again, I guess. So I'm located in the Biological Services Department at Bay Mills Indian Community, but I work closely with the Planning Department and Tribal Administration at Bay Mills on addressing the environmental concerns. And these two departments are buying properties and developing or renovating various properties, so I'm in frequent communication with them. And luckily, I'm like, my office is right underneath them, so just go down the stairs and talk to me, and vice versa. I also work with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. So if a property is on trust land, then EGLE has assisted with providing technical assistance when needed. Some of our properties are not on trust land though, and the way Bay Mills operates is the tribe recognizes EGLE as the regulatory authority on those sites. So we follow their process, their permits, and we work with EGLE staff on those types of properties.
And we had similar working with others as well. We have a term called Gadugi from Cherokee. It's actually working together to accomplish certain missions. So for us, we also are housed in our Secretary of Natural Resources program. But we were actually, when we first started putting this grant together, we started to see what other Cherokee Nation programs we had available that could provide types of services to these communities. And for example, we reached out to our housing authority through Cherokee Nation, our Commerce Department, our Planning Department as well, and other Cherokee Nation departments, kind of like our cultural and community outreach programs. So we kind of did a lot of internal, what can the tribes do for these communities and what grants do they have available and what tribal funds are available to be able to go back and out to the communities. We were also able to work with our EPA partners in our Oklahoma Corporation Commission with the state, as well as our Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality with our state as well. They have a wealth of knowledge. They've actually both were very familiar with this grant, gave us some really good advice on especially with partnerships and how to get started and what to do. And we also, the exciting part about this grant, we've never really done as a tribe, we're actually going to be able to work with city managers, mayors, community leaders, as well as members of our tribal citizens, and especially tribal leadership in these communities. And I probably forgot to mention, Cherokee Nation, and within our reservation, we have several communities. So we're spaced through about 7,000 square miles. So there's a big differences between the communities, which makes our job a little bit more challenging because we have to pick certain communities and be able to work with them and address their needs.
Yeah. Okay. What suggestions would you like to share with other tribes that are considering applying for EPA funding? And next to that, what do you wish you would have known before you applied for EPA competitive grant funding?
So I have a lot to say here. And I learn best by messing things up, it seems like. So I would just say work with a contractor before you apply so that you have good baseline information and have them come up with a cleanup plan and costs for you beforehand. So if you don't have that information by now, you might already be a little bit behind the curve. You probably are. But we have also submitted grants at the very last moment, so it can be done.
And as a
You will-
reminder, Jen's talking specifically about the cleanup grant. So
Yes, thank you.
what she's talking about, the cleanup plan and all of that, that's only needed if you're applying for the competitive cleanup grant.
Right. Thank you for clarifying. So you do need to have a phase 1 environmental site assessment done and a phase 2 site assessment completed or an equivalent. So if you happen to be a tribe in Michigan, just so you all know, a baseline environmental assessment or BEA is considered a phase 2 equivalent, and that's what we used. Make sure in your budget to include a contingency percentage amount because everything costs more than you think it will. By the time it's funded, it's been a year later. So our contingency was 10%, but I think going higher than that is really justifiable. Also remember to consider the cost of stabilizing a site or basic rehabilitation after work is done. I forgot about that, so I'm going to have to use some of my bill funding for that. So a cleanup will likely leave disturbances on the land, and so you should plan to address the need to backfill an excavation or address possible soil erosion. And then you are going to be required, if it's BIL funding, to have a sign and supplies and labor for building and installing that sign. They are like 4 by 6 feet large, so just plan for that, like maybe $1,000 in your budget for that. Consider how much you want your contractor or your qualified environmental professional or QEP to do and build that into your budget. For example, once you're awarded, you're going to need to have a cleanup plan and a communication plan, and someone will need to carry out those activities in those plans. So if you want your QEP or another contractor to handle those tasks, make sure that's in your budget. I personally chose to handle most of that myself. Check your timelines and budgets very carefully before submitting. I had a couple dates wrong in my first application, and that really hurt me the first time around. It might have been the biggest thing. I just didn't have my timeline quite correct, and so they were like, "Does she know what she's talking about?" So we were not funded. Have KSU TAB review your application. I had them review our application the second time around, and that was really helpful. If you aren't funded, do the EPA debriefing, because that was probably the most important part for us for being funded the next 2 times. Is I learned a lot through that debriefing. And I just want to throw in something else. It's a little bit off topic, but if you are demolishing a building or deconstructing a building, EPA will often not fund that. However, we actually have deconstruction and demolition funded in both of our applications, and that was because we had lead-based paint and asbestos, and it was so incorporated into the building that we needed to demolish it. And in our other application, we have a Quonset hut that's metal, and the contamination is within it, in the soil underneath the floor of it. So we're going to deconstruct that. It's going to go to scrap for recycling, but so we were able to get that funded. So a lot of times people say like they won't fund demo or deconstruction, but sometimes they will. So don't be put off. You can always still try because sometimes it's very justifiable.
Oh, yes, and for us, some of the things that we'd like to share was looking into what our tribe, what we wanted. Actually, was it in the direction we wanted to go? Was this a grant that we felt would actually be something our programs can contribute to and actually be able to complete the deliverables? We have a small staff, so we wanted to make sure we were able to do much of the work ourselves, but be able to contract. For example, we're going to be doing a lot of the work in-house with existing staff, but contracts in the more complicated projects, working with these communities. So I think that was a big thing for us is what are our capabilities and what can we grow? You know, what would be building our technical capacity with our Brownfields program, and to be able to have the support of our administration as well as being able to have the support from our communities. For us, I also agree with Jen. I think working with TAB, Kansas KSU TAB, with the review was very beneficial for us. I think it strengthened our grant. They were able to provide really good advice, and we were actually learned a few things that we just didn't, trying to catch those points, trying to look at, what's required. They were able to see it from a different standpoint for us and provided some, I thought, was very critical and very important components to actually help us get the grant. So we thank them for that. We also think some of the EPA people we talked to that gave us information about the grant, like I said, we were kind of really nervous about it because it's a really big grant for us. And we're really excited. And I think like Jen's right, there's a lot of planning details, especially in the budget, how to get to the 5 years and making sure you don't shortchange yourself. So there's some challenges in that. When we did something very different we'd never done before, and I've been writing grants for 20 plus years, and we did something where the whole team itself wrote the grant. So we each had responsibilities and divvied up it so it wasn't so overwhelming with this grant. And for example, we spaced out what certain people were going to write about and made sure we captured and got all the points. And when we first put the draft together, I think we were like 18 pages and there was like a 12-page limit. So we had to almost cut a large chunk of it out to make it fit. And so that was one thing I wish I'd known more is don't be intimidated and just go after it, because it's very competitive. This particular one is very competitive. But if we would not have applied, because like I said, we've seen it over the years. It's like, oh, that's on our bucket list, our wish list. And I wish we would have done it previously, because there's been some really great projects with Cherokee Nation, with some of our local communities. We really could have done some amazing work and great showcases, but we just weren't ready. I feel like we're in a better place now, and we've got some better technical skills to be able to serve our communities better. And yeah, if there's anybody that has questions, I know Jen and I both will be glad to talk to anybody. And we've had several people in Region 5 that have been mentors to Cherokee Nation and helped us with several of our Brownfields and Superfund grants. So reach out to other tribes, see what they're doing, see what they've done, what's successful, what's not. And we love helping each other out. So.
And I'm just going to add on to what Jason said. Yes, please reach out. Always happy to help. But there are a lot of moving pieces with the application, like a lot of different like attachments and things. And so having KSU tab help you, just make sure you've got everything put together. It was kind of took a little pressure off, because like, do I have everything correct? And so that was really helpful.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say we did not ask them to say those things about the KSU tab reviews. They volunteered that independently, but I appreciate that point came up. The KSU tab team, the tribal tab team, we take these grant reviews very, very, very seriously. I take it personally if I review a grant and it doesn't get funded. I can't speak for everyone else, but that's just how I am. I also used to run a Brownfields program, and I wrote these grants. I always had KSU tab review them for me, because it's the people that look at these are in these all the time. And so really kind of understand what can help push a proposal over the edge and get the funding. And also just having another set of eyes on your proposal is always a great thing to do. So it doesn't have to be K-State tab, but have someone else outside of whoever was the writing team review it and kind of tear it apart for you. Okay, I think we're still okay on time. So I'm gonna ask you both, did I already ask this question? Sorry, I got so into the conversation. What are some challenges and obstacles you faced when applying? We haven't discussed this part yet, have we?
I got more stuff
Okay.
I can talk about. So
all
sure.
right, let's do it. I think that this is really the important part, right? Because there's, I mean, some of it you can't learn until you're in it. I mean, there's just no way to prepare for it. But there are some things that you kind of like, oh, this would have been really helpful if I would have expected to have run across this. So, all right, challenges and obstacles, please.
You're going to hear over and over again to start early, and you should start early. We did submit 2 applications rather last minute, but you have to have a public comment process and a period and an open house for your application, at least in the cleanup grants. I'm assuming it's for the others as well. So you can't just jump into this in the last 2 weeks before the deadline, because I think you have to have a 30-day public or community engagement process. And then the most difficult part for the application, in my opinion, was the community data and getting information that was tribe specific. Now that I've worked on some grants, places where you can find that info is in census data, the disadvantaged community maps in the EPA EJ screen, and climate and economic justice screening tool. You can get some info from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and American Community Survey data, Social Vulnerability Index, Center for Disease Control and Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry. But a lot of that information is at the county level. But I just really struggled with the community data the first time around, and it took me a long time to write that portion of the grant.
Yes, I also agree with Jen. I think that was one of the challenges that Cherokee Nation had, was we actually had to do a lot more community data, collecting community data and putting that in the grant. It was required. So all 5 communities we picked were totally different in size, totally different in the interest in their needs. For example, one of our smallest communities, which Cherokee Nation is one of the most invested with, is there's a community, but on the population count is less than 200 people, and the town is dying. It was a mining town. And so the infrastructure was no longer there. And Cherokee Nation is wanting to rebuild their restructure, and we help with some of the actual services, which also includes like utility support, like bringing back in better roads and water and electricity, and helping meet some of those what I call social and environmental justice issues. After like a mining town, things leave. We also found out too, collecting data, that getting what we needed from individual specific communities, they're different. And we also use the EJ tools. And one of the examples I'd like to highlight on is, with some of the tribal communities, we don't really have the correct information. For example, the population. Some tribes do not send or fill out check American Indian for the census. So our numbers are wrong. For example, several of our communities, we knew there was a larger tribal, because there are larger tribal communities, but the numbers didn't really show it, but like 30%. And it was like, this town is actually more like 75, 80% tribal. But so we had to try to catch those points based on using the EJ tool. And using other data out there for us is to use like our floodplain. So we had one community that had floodplain issues. And then some of the environmental justice issues were a little bit different. For example, food sustainability issues. And we have one that has an amazing project, doesn't really fit anywhere. It was homelessness, and it kind of was like a very social disadvantage. So we're hoping to be able to lock in individually on specific communities and identifying those needs, but how do you capture that in a grant? So that was one of our challenges. We knew what we wanted as a tribe, but then you're trying to catch those points, but they're like, we know it, but sometimes what we know, we really can't transfer to paper. So that was a challenge for us. And I think, an obstacle too was, how do you put the information out for the communities to do them justice? We're going to read this too. It's a public document. And I'm like, we want to make sure there's something that they'd be proud of, that this grant also serves them. And it goes beyond just what the tribe's going to use it. So we've got some big goals, big ideas, and really looking forward to working with the communities. And, I think that was one thing I wanted to share with everybody. If you write a community grant, be sure to reach out to your community officials. They may be able to provide additional information within the communities and have better statistics, better numbers, and things you can use. Especially one of our sections we had the biggest trouble with was the reuse section. We didn't know what to put in there, but we got some ideas from these communities, what they'd like to see. It's not in stone, but they gave us some feedback, which helped, I think, gave us valuable input for the grant.
And all those things that,
sorry. Go
sorry.
ahead.
All those things that Jason talks about is really hard to put into a 10 or 12 page limit application. That's another very difficult part of these grants.
It is, because you want this to be interesting for people to read, but you don't have space to make it flowery and pretty either. You both brought up really, really valuable points related to this. You know, the specifically, I think related to the data and collecting the data and making sure that it's representative data of your community that you're writing about. Because, you know, the whole point, part of what you're trying to do here is tell your community story, and then you're using this data to kind of bolster that and demonstrate, you know, why this is a need. And if the publicly available data, like through the census, is flawed, you know, that being aware of that and understanding how to work around that and how to get appropriate data is a really, really important aspect of this whole thing. And, you know, Jason, also what you were talking about of getting input from the communities themselves about, you know, what the reuse, what did they want to see going on here. That public piece in all EPA grants is really, really, really important. That's just kind of a general comment to everyone. They want to see that the work that's being proposed is sort of coming from the community and will benefit the community. So I appreciate that you both brought up these great points.
Jennifer, can I make a quick comment as well?
Yes, please do.
I just want to thank you both for sharing that, but going along with the data information, we know that sometimes data is not always accurate, right? It's just general information that might not represent a community. So I think you guys pointed out something that you should also include in your application as well. If there's no accurate data, at least saying like the information that is provided is not accurate of the communities, and that way I feel like whoever reviews the application will at least know that you've tried and the information that is out there is not sufficient enough to describe the community. But I think that's a valid point, and thank you guys for sharing that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that was one thing that, like, for example, that small community, that if they had to go individually by themselves, they wouldn't be able to compete with a huge municipal city, you know, like a big town, which has, like, Oklahoma City has a lot. But when you have a dying town and that really needs help, and I think this one just tore on our heartstrings, it's like, we've got to do something, you know, and this grant was able to give this something like that community like this a chance. And we were able to use some of our data. For example, some of our tribal data that we have our own citizenship. Most tribes have their own citizenship data. So sometimes we can look at that and that will help us a little bit more on the data collection.
This is Beth. May I interject? Or I have a question. So can tribal health centers or hospitals provide data?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And we did reach out to our health center, but they gave me very raw data.
Yeah.
So we were doing this grant in a hurry, and it just was really difficult to try to make that data meaningful in the time frame that we had. So if we'd started earlier, probably would have been a little better.
So would you suggest, aside from starting early, start your data collection first thing and while you're
Yeah.
parallel to it? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Beth, I appreciate you bringing that up, because the help information for many communities, it's not unique to tribal communities, can be very, very difficult to locate, but is very, very important within the grant. So I don't know, Jason, if you had some things that you wanted to add to that point.
Oh, no, I agree with that. I think being able to reach out to some resources, especially some within the tribe. The tribe has stuff as well as Indian Health Service and probably CDC as well can look up some of the environmental health issues. So yeah, I agree with Jen. Reach out to any data collection you can get early in the process because you have to go through it. It's like, what can I do with this data? Will it help me with the grant, or will it confuse people? I know in some of our data that we've done, it's like it strengthens the application and it strengthens the process, but a lot of people aren't used to that. because it's to them, it's like new data they've never seen before. For example, we know tribes utilize a lot of the resources a little bit different than the non-tribal members do, especially with brownfields and Superfund sites. So we try to look at that, and our assessments are also based on that. How does this serve our tribal communities? And so it's like we kind of wear a different hat, different lens when we're looking and evaluating, doing our assessments.
Great. So you've both just sort of, speckled this throughout, but I'm going to ask very directly. Can you just talk about how you've engaged your community and your stakeholders throughout this whole process, the preparation, the writing process specifically, but then, also maybe how that continues once the grant actually gets started? I know, Jason, you all haven't started just yet, but your experience is leading up to this point.
So you have to, as part of your application, engage with the community. So we posted things on our Bay Mills website and on social media, and then we have an email listserv which reaches Bay Mills employees, most of whom are Bay Mills tribal citizens. So that was a good way to reach out to folks. We posted public notice, held the 30-day public comment period, and we had an open house. I usually hold these over lunch hour because, like I just mentioned, a lot of folks are already working for the tribe, so they could come in on their lunch hour. I usually have food, and I let people know that. That brings people in too. EPA does not really like to fund food, so it just comes out of my pocket, and that's great because if I get more people, that's better. And I once held an evening open house, and like one person came, so I learned my lesson there. And other ways that we're engaging the community now is we have a community newspaper that comes out quarterly, so I've put articles in there about our cleanups. Our biological services department has a newsletter that's online that it comes out a couple times a year. I do public presentations. Again, I pretty much always do lunch and learns over the lunch hour with food to boost participation. I did do targeted mailings in the areas where we're doing the cleanup so that the community members who live right in that area know what to expect during the cleanup process. We have a committee, Brownfields committee, so we have those meetings monthly, and then I also provide updates to our tribal executive council during their working sessions. So those are the main ways that I engage with the community.
For us, once we decided we kind of wanted to go after this grant, so we started reaching out to some of the communities we thought we could be able to service with some of the environmental concerns that they had. And instantly we got 5. We actually reached out to maybe like 7 out of 5, just instantly joined, filled it up, and I was like, okay, these are our magic 5. And then, of course, the beauty of this grant is it's 5 years. So we're going to be adding more communities as we go along. And we'll just kind of work with their projects first and then see how we can multiply it to other projects. So we're excited because I think this is where we can actually serve some of these communities. We don't know how many yet. It's kind of like you said, we haven't actually started the grant, but we've started the discussions. And some of them were like, oh, I've got this site, I've got this site. But when we were writing the grant, it's like, just give us your top 2. And then when we move, it may turn into 10, and we may not be able to leave that city. So we're excited because we're able to engage with the community. Like I mentioned, some of our city officials and some of our tribal leaders in those communities. For example, one of the tribal leaders that we have is very interested in this grant and is looking forward to us being able to do some of these projects within the community. And we hope to be able to bridge some of our Cherokee Nation resources like our housing. Can some certain housing additions be built in these communities? So hopefully we can maybe be able to do better partnerships and bring in Cherokee Nation to the table. These communities have reached out to us, and so there may be other opportunities for redevelop initiatives, whether it be housing or the tribe setting up outreach centers, clinics, wellness centers. There's a lot of potential. So I think that's why it's a little overwhelming for us right now because we can go a lot of different directions, but we're really, really, really looking forward to hearing what the public and the community have to say, because this grant will not just serve tribal citizens, it'll serve everybody in that community as a whole. So we're excited to be able to provide something like that for these communities. and be able to meet some of their needs, whether it's, building a homeless shelter or building a farmer's market for food issues, food insecurity issues, and maybe like addressing some of the floodplain issues. So we're able to combine all the environmental elements and work with the community. I think I'm nervous about it. I've never done it before, but I'm anxious to hear what they have to say.
I think what you've touched on to me is part of the magic and the beauty of Brownfields programs and doing Brownfields work is that it does, yes, it's about assessing sites and cleaning up sites, but it's ultimately about enhancing the community, bringing needs, addressing the needs of the community and bringing in resources that they maybe couldn't get any other way. So you're turning these, what are often considered challenges, right? These brownfield sites, and you're turning them into these amazing community assets, which to me, that's part of why I love this. It's really where the magic is, I think. How are we with time? Because I forgot how long we're doing this.
We have 25 more minutes.
Oh my goodness, well, let's keep talking. I'm interested in this community engagement. Well, hang on, let me pause. I haven't seen any direct questions coming into the chat, but I do want to pause for a moment and see if any of the participants have questions directly for our speakers here over anything that's come up so far. I don't see anything. No one's raising hands. I don't want to overlook that important part. So you just finished talking about this community engagement piece, and that's, it's a really, really, really important part. Did you find that difficult to write about, to fit into your application? And how do I want to, I guess if so, how did you kind of handle that? How did you get that aspect in, and especially, staying within, it's always about the page limits, right? We have 12 pages, and we have to talk about all this stuff. But making sure that community engagement piece is actually adequately covered.
I thought it was a little bit challenging to put it in there. And one of the challenging things is that it's hard to get a lot of people to come to engage with when we try to do community engagement, at least at Bay Mills. So, but I hear that from everybody. So, you want to have a really good application. But like that first time, when I had one person show up, it was like, oh, you hate to even put that in your application, but that's what it was. You tried and you only got, so you learn your lessons as you go. But yeah, it was a little bit difficult to put it in there, and with the page limits, that definitely is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was the same for us as well, because we had a lot of ideas how we want to address the community aspect, how to include public participation, and be able to get really good feedback that I think can drive our direction where we're going with this grant. But how do we get it on paper, for example, was a challenge for us because each community has different needs. And then we were like, okay, do we work with the city officials or we work with tribal officials? Because we have a lot of, in our districts, we break them down by council districts. And I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to marry both of them and have our tribal council invite them to the city meetings as well, and try to get public engagement that way, have like a meeting, be able to have maybe a moderator to assist us and help us to make sure we get the best feedback. And I think hopefully we'll have city representation. I think that's going to be critical for us, is how do we get public communication as well as the city representation, because we need their ideas to kind of merge together. And I'm afraid our first meeting is probably going to be all over the place, but that's what we need. We need ideas, we need feedback, And, this could open up a potential, what I would create like redevelopment venues. For example, if there's a housing issue in that community, maybe the tribe needs to build more housing in that community. For example, the one community I referred to, the Marble City one, which was a former mining town that was dying, they do need some infrastructure support. So I think we're going to have different environmental issues as well that we're going to have to tackle. Different feedback. I think that one it's very rural versus a city one because they don't have those resources. So I think some of the needs they're going to be hitting us for is access to information, access to a gathering place, access to clean water, access to. So I expect a lot more infrastructure thing. But so how do you get that into paper? And for us, we had to try to very briefly, like Jen said, keep it very short. Top what the communities were. So we broke down 5 communities, picked their top 2 projects, and was trying to capitalize what they were wanting to see in their communities. And then it may expand. I kind of hope it does. I kind of hope that it starts the discussions and then we can continue the grant and continue the services. For example, Brownfields is a great program. It can go a lot of different directions. And for us, sometimes it's more than just redeveloping. It's reusing a property, or it's cleaning up a property for different use. It may be a park. And for Cherokee Nation, we actually do a lot of how does this protect our culture? How does this protect our outreach? So sometimes we're thinking, okay, maybe we really don't want to redevelop this. We don't want a bunch of big buildings on there. We don't want to create a bunch of jobs, but we want to preserve the cultural history. So do we want parks in there? Do we want a place where people can gather? Gathering is very important to the Cherokee Nation. And I think, how do I get that on a grant application? That was a big challenge. And I think that's critical for us because I think that's what drives us. It's what the tribe wants to see, what the community wants to see. And how do you sell your story really quickly on a 12-page application?
And those are, that's all really, and communicating it, I think, in a way that someone that is completely unfamiliar with your community will understand, and will understand, maybe this doesn't seem important to anyone else, but this is critical and essential to this community here.
Yeah.
I have a little more to add to that too. So I would just say, when it comes to public participation and community engagement, don't just make that a box that you check on your application process. We had a public meeting, and I'm not from this area originally, so I didn't know the history of one of our buildings, but it was a place where people worked, and people had in later years been sick. Some had passed away from cancer. And so there was the concern, like, was this building, did it contribute to any of that? And I didn't know that. I didn't know that history. So first of all, trying to put that into a grant application is, you want to respect everybody, but you also want people to understand, who are reading that application, that this is very important, that, there's this history here with this site. It really needs to be addressed. There's not funding available to address it otherwise. And for me as a Brownfields coordinator, now I am very, very motivated to get rid of this building, to clean up this contamination. It's very important to me. It's like, it's an emotional thing now.
Wow.
I agree with Jen. I kind of want to add on to that just as well with Jen, that for example, we wanted to be respectful to that community. For example, what would they think if they saw our application? We didn't want to look at it. So we understood the need, and what makes us want to scream even louder and write even bigger words. But I know that what would they say if they saw it? Nobody wants to be labeled as a poor community or a community that's dying. That community that I talked about, so we didn't use the word, that the community was slowly disappearing. So we were trying to be respectful, and then trying to capture what our mission was as well, to assist that city.
Yeah, that's great. We have a couple of questions that have come in the chat. So one is, this understanding that, childcare can be something that can be funded as part of community engagement. We've discussed the food part already. That can be challenging to get funded, but it is, eating together when you gather is really very essential in a lot of communities. So figuring out kind of how to make that work. But what are some of the other ways, including both of those two things, childcare, eating, some other ways that you got engaged, you feel like you got some extra engagement from the community?
Well, I hadn't thought of childcare, but that's a great idea.
You're already in the right direction though, of doing this during the day, realizing
That's
people don't show up.
right. I'm already trying to get people when they're at work.
Yeah, maybe
they
it's
are
because there's no
free.
childcare.
Yeah. But if I try to do it at night, I will think about that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that is a good aspect. Some people can't, get away because they have their children they have to look out after. So you're right. I think being able to provide a resource to get full participation, I think that's a wonderful idea. I agree with Jen. I didn't think of that. I know one thing I think we're going to be looking at is when we have a meeting, what can we benefit for the public? For example, we may have a meeting, but we may have cultural activities with it. So we're also sharing our cultural, and it may be like basket weaving while we're having a meeting, or making pottery. Sometimes, and we're right. The best part is gathering, the social interaction. And we need that to get the dialogue, and we need that information from the public. So how do we get the public involved and be able to maximize their time as well? And then they get full benefit and then we get the information we need.
That's a really good point about, engaging in some type of, activity that, maybe it's specific to culture, maybe not, but then it's not just, people are engaged in something while they're sitting there discussing. So it's not just this, like the talking heads in the room, right? That's a really good point. Have you found, this is something that I've heard a lot, tapping into other events and things that are already going on? So instead of like, here's something else you need to come to, trying to get invited to places where the community is already going to be. Have you tried that? Was that successful? Anything to comment about there?
Yeah, so we have had booths at Powwow and things like that. But one of the places where I've gone, and I really just love it, is I go to the Elders Committee meetings. I've only been to a couple, but I bring snacks and just love to engage with them. So many great memories. They definitely have like really strong opinions about different things. So I've talked with them about their brownfield properties and things like that. So that's one of the ones that I've dropped in on.
Well, the same for us. We also have a lot of what we call not just citizen meetings like for the cities have. We also have what we call tribal council meetings within just the restrictions. For example, in their communities, our tribal leaders for that community will have a meeting to update them what services Cherokee Nation has out there. And so we may be able to utilize some of that to be able to get some public interaction, public feedback. We're looking forward to working with the cities and see how we can best utilize some of their meetings and their, for example, activities they have going on. And for example, if we need to set up a booth or display and to share with the community what Brownfields is and what we can provide. And we can also reach out to our partners. For example, we can have not just from the tribal side, but our state partners, and maybe able to create a venue where everybody gets information from every angle. We provide resources for them.
Yeah, that's really great. So other question that's come in, first of all, just, thanking both of you for your time and the insights and the guidance that you're providing. It is really helpful to everyone here, and the work that you're doing in your community is really significant and impactful. So aside from that, were there any challenges and or constraints when bridging with surrounding communities and jurisdictions?
I would say there weren't really any constraints. What I would say is for one of our sites, which is not on the trust land, It's located next to a homeowners association, and it's kind of at the beginning of this long point that juts out into the St. Mary's River. There's about 120 different homes out that way. And the Chippewa Landing site has sort of been in disrepair for many years. We purchased it a couple of years ago, but it had already kind of been in disrepair for a while. And a lot of those homeowners out there were, they just don't love that that's sort of the entrance to their property. So through the community engagement process, I did start to hear from them. There's also a lot of rumors flying around about that site. So it was really nice to be able to engage with them and let them know like what's really going on, what our plans are. That's why I sent the letter to all the homeowners who live out there so that they would know directly who to contact and talk with any questions or concerns. And so there has been a communication that's opened up. So I mean, I don't know if that is a challenge, but it was not something, I guess I should have maybe expected something like that, but that's just something that's happened since, through the public engagement process. And, now we're trying to work with them. We're trying to keep it a little better maintained out there until we do demo and totally clean up that site. So I think that's been good too, that they know the tribe's being responsible. We've got, good plans for this site.
Yeah, ours is similar to what Jen had mentioned too, and it's working with the communities, opening up that engagement. For example, we spaced our communities that we picked actually geographically in different locations, so that we had some on the north side of our reservation as well as in the center, and then we kind of spaced out. So we have 5. That way, there wasn't any confusion, and we can move that around based on the additional cities that come in. But starting out, we were kind of afraid, well, some communities find out about this, they might get upset because we didn't reach out to them, and we've had that happen in the past. With one of our grants, we provided a service for. I think back then we provided like a household hazardous waste collection events, and we only got funded for 5. And we picked certain communities, but other communities found out and said, Cherokee Nation's doing this. How come they're not doing it in our community? So we're trying to be as fair as we can and kind of space out geographically, just to kind of help with some of the surrounding communities. If you're in a neighboring community, please join us and we can be able to provide those services. Same thing with the communities. We're looking for this actually grant will actually enable us to look beyond just the tribal services. We're used to providing services for our tribe, but this grant will open doors where we're able to provide service for everybody in that community and be able to address some of the needs. So I'm kind of excited, like the homeless shelter. I hope we'll really pull that off because that's a need for that city and that will benefit everybody. And so that will eliminate some of the jurisdiction issues. But it does meet some of the social economic issues that we do have facing together as humans. And so I'm looking forward to being able to tackle some of those challenges. For example, that other one that I referred to a lot, that was like in a rural area, we want to be able to identify some of the municipal and rural constraints and be able to address that and help them with their environmental needs and some of their redevelopment initiatives. And maybe Cherokee Nation can have opportunity to fund some of these. For example, if it's like infrastructure redevelopment, like roads and water and sanitation and housing, some of these communities could benefit from these services. So we hope to be able to take care of some of those, I call, challenges or jurisdictional issues. Each city needs it. Each city has similar problems, but I get kind of a little bit discouraged when I hear, oh, that's a tribal problem. The tribe should take care of the solid waste issues, and then you hear the county problem, then you hear state. It's like it's all work together. So I think that's our theme is Gadugi just working together, being able to find solutions for these communities.
Yeah, that's
And
great. Sorry, Jen, go ahead.
no worries. So I did think of another challenge, I guess. And so this is my first cleanup, and that site that's on fee land, working with the Michigan Department of Energy, Great Lakes, and Environment, Eagle. It's kind of, I wasn't prepared for all the permitting that was going to happen, and that's really pushed back our project. Like we were supposed to be tackling this in early July. And we haven't started yet because of permits and stuff. Eagle's been great coming out. we met out at the site. There was a bunch of people there from that agency, and so they were very helpful. But I guess I wasn't prepared for how long the permitting process can take for certain things. This site is right on the water, so we have to involve the Army Corps of Engineers, Eagle, and so it's pushing the process back. So always maybe put a little buffer in your timeline.
That's a really good point. I feel like nothing slows down development like environmental issues and kind of dealing with that aspect of things. So that's a really good point that I think we need to pause, potentially end on that. We have just a few minutes left. So here's what I would like to do right now. Dana, if you Jason and Jen, don't fully disappear yet, just in case. But Dana, if you could pull up the evaluation slide, please. We do have a really quick, just like 3-question, super quick evaluation related to this event today. And if you could either right now, the link should end up in your chat box, or scan the QR code there. If you could, at some point today, it doesn't have to be right now, take a minute and a half to just kind of let us know your feedback on this event. That would be really, really, really helpful to us. We take your input and your feedback very, very seriously, and we do use that when we can to kind of shape what types and how we continue to provide information to communities moving forward. So your voice, if you're willing to share it with us, would be really, really, really appreciated. I would like to open things up like publicly. I don't know if Dana, if you're willing to do that, to let everybody unmute themselves if they want, in case there is discussion that needs to happen, that people would like to say their questions instead of type their questions. We have just a few minutes for that. And if nobody jumps at that, then I'm gonna everybody can now unmute if you want. But if nobody jumps in and starts talking, I'm gonna let Jen and Jason keep talking to carry us home. But I would like, Dana, if you can advance to the next slide. Just to make sure everybody has our contact information. So we have on the left column is the presenter information, EPA and my information. And then on the right side is Jason and Jen's information. So they have both very graciously volunteered their time to be here with us today, and also to assist anyone, answer any questions that you may have moving forward if you're thinking about applying for grants. So we'll leave that up there for just the last couple minutes here. So go ahead, everybody start talking. Nobody all at once. One thing I wanted to ask both of you, Jen and Jason, is just you've talked about a lot of really fantastic aspects of proposal writing, engaging the community, are you ready to do this, kind of all of these things. Is there anything else that we have not asked, that we haven't touched on, that you think has come to mind just while we're sitting here today? Because I know we've asked you that to get ready for this, but if anything else has come to mind that you really think everybody else should know, or that could be really beneficial to this audience, I'd like to offer you the floor right now to share that. Oh, you're muted, Jason. Wait, Jason, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I turned it off, so let me distract. Well, I just want to say thanks for inviting both Jen and I. I know that the Brownfields program is a wonderful program. It has actually been very beneficial to our tribe. We're able to do a lot of really neat projects within our community. So if you guys are interested in the project, definitely apply. Don't like for us, we were very intimidated by this particular grant. And I think it's going to be our best yet, our best yet. And I think our fears got in the way of things. And this has been a funding opportunity that's been out there for a while. And we're super excited. And if there's anything we can do to help, there's a lot of resources out there, like I said, KSU TAB, our federal state partners with EPA. They'll be able to help you and assist you with any questions you have with grant writing. I feel like that's something that's really big for our tribe. We're starting to get more into the technical writing skills for grant writing. I think these particular grants that are available with the Brownfields program are amazing. And I'm like, Jen, now listen to hearing Jen, I want a cleanup grant. So I think I think that's on our bucket list now. We'll go to maybe we'll apply for a cleanup one. Then we'll
Well,
reach out to you, Jen.
I think you should, you'll do the assessments with this community-wide assessment one, right? So you'll have some sites that'll come up through that process that you'll realize, this is it. This is our chance.
Absolutely. Same as Jason. Thanks so much for having us on here. I do love helping other folks, so it's nice. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. And I do also just want to put in a plug for your project manager with EPA. So a lot of folks know Rosita Clark in Region 5. She was my project manager. She's moved on to a different department or division now. But she was so helpful and instrumental in getting us started. And if you have questions, just reach out to them and they can really assist you in what to do with your application. They can't after the application period is open. It's kind of limited what they can help you with. But before that, reach out to them because they can really help you out.
That's a really great point. And after the guidelines are open, when EPA cannot help anymore, the TAB programs can, not just K-State TAB, but depending on what region you're in, your regional TAB provider and tribal TAB can help with that. And I not just because EPA is here, but I do really appreciate that point that you made about going to them because EPA wants you to succeed as much as you want to, maybe not as much, but pretty close to as much as you want to succeed, right? Because your success helps them. If you are not successful and there was something that they could have done to kind of help push that forward, at least based in my experience with the people I've communicated with, they don't feel great about that. They are in this, they're invested in this, and they really want the communities to succeed in the work that they're trying to do. So don't be scared of them. And Beth put a great reminder in here to make sure you come back next week. The next webinar will provide tips and helpful hints to get ready for tackling your EPA Brownfields grant application. So we will be back here, same time next Tuesday. And that's it. Thank you so much for everybody that attended. Jen, Jason, thank you so much for your time and all the wonderful comments and discussion that you shared with all of us here. It was just really means a lot. And, thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to echo what Jennifer said. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Jen, for being a panelist. This was super helpful information, just learning about the work that you are all doing. And please reach out to us. We are here to help you. That is why we're here. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I hope to see everyone at the next webinar.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great afternoon. Great rest of your week.
Bye.